This is Nekesa with self-reflection. Last week, we were with Collins Majale and he took us through his journey towards self-awareness. I promised you that today we'll be looking at self-acceptance. So sit there and go the whole journey with me as we talk about self-acceptance. So, how can you describe self-acceptance? Self-acceptance is actually an affirmation of self. You affirm yourself. It means you embrace both your good, negative, non-estimable and estimable parts of who you are. When you accept yourself, you learn to protect yourself from negative people who just want to criticize you for the sake. That is what self-acceptance is all about. But even before we go on, I want you to note that self-acceptance is not self-esteem. Many people tend to confuse the two, but self-acceptance is wider. It is learning to embrace your entire being. When we talk about self-esteem, we are talking about the good feelings that you feel about yourself, you could also have a low self-esteem, but self-esteem is based more on feelings and achievements, and you cannot live your life or evaluate and rate yourself based on temporary events and actions. This can lead to anxiety. So when we are talking about self-acceptance, we are not talking about self-esteem. You see, a lack of self-acceptance makes one to live in a space of temporary happiness. If you don't accept yourself for who you are, your weaknesses, your strengths, your failures, your successes, then it becomes dangerous because life has both negative and positive encounters. So self-acceptance helps you to really balance your life without necessarily feeling today you're very happy, another day you feel depressed and sad, because you learn to just embrace yourself. Another point to note is self-acceptance is not self-improvement. When we talk about self-improvement, we are talking about fixing things, This is not what we are talking about today. We are talking about affirming ourselves, self-acceptance, despite our mistakes, despite our failures, despite our successes. We are going to accept everything about us because our identity is not in our mistakes. So we cannot say that I am this mistake. I am a product of this mistake. Your identity cannot be pegged on that. As we become self-aware, it does not interfere with our ability to accept who we are. Okay? The moment you become self-aware, it doesn't take away your ability to accept who you are. An example is this. Probably you were born with a deformity, or you were born with something that really people may not look at it as a positive thing. As you become self-aware of that, it doesn't mean that you want to change it. You actually learn to accept it, to live with it, and know how to interact with people. Even the fact that it takes time for you to study or to understand maybe autistic children. When you become aware of that, then it makes it very easy. You may not change the situation, but it may help you to accept yourself And that is something that is positive, because you now know how to live with the situation. You know how to relate with people with the situation that it is. That is what self-acceptance is all about. It is not judging yourself. It is not wanting to improve or to change anything. You just look at yourself for who you are, and you accept yourself with your strengths and your weaknesses. You know, you could be listening to me and maybe you want to argue from a spiritual perception. And I began to think about it, even as a Christian, that, you know, by the time you come for the altar call and you say, I want to receive probably Christ, it means you have come to the place of self-acceptance. You acknowledge that you are a sinner, or you acknowledge that you have struggles. People who don't acknowledge and accept themselves with their weaknesses, they are the ones who live a life of self-righteousness, because they feel that they don't have any weaknesses, and they don't struggle with anything. So there's no need, you see. So once you self-accept, then the journey towards transformation can begin. I also want us to talk about factors that determine our self-acceptance. And one of the things that we are going to talk about, and it is very key and crucial, is childhood background. When you look at all the psychological theories, it cuts across. Childhood, as you grow up, it is a key factor when it comes to life, who you are, your identity, how you relate to people. From all the theories, the psychosexual with Sigmund Freud, the psychosocial, Erik Erikson, humanistic, you know, with Rogers or Alfred Adler, all of them, childhood background is very important. And based on research, we understand that children under the age of 8 years don't have a clear identity or sense of self outside their caregivers or their parents. You see, if you met a child who is 6 years, 5 years, 7 years, you cannot really ask them who they are. Everything they will talk about, they will associate it with their caregiver. You know, I was just having a discussion with a friend of mine, and she told me about a child who in class, she's always telling the teacher in pre-unit that she's busy. She's busy. Even when the teacher asks her a question in class, the girl cannot answer. All she says is, "Teacher, I am busy." She has learned to identify with that slogan, and her mother is always telling her, she's busy, she's busy. So you realize that children under the age of 8, they don't have a clear sense of identity. Why do we say that childhood affects our acceptance, our self-acceptance? It is because children that have grown up and have not been able to receive unconditional positive regard, they may struggle with feelings of guilt or rejection, and also a self-false concept. You remember I talked to you about a false self-concept whereby you feel entitled, you feel that loving people must be conditional. Those are children. When you see adults who struggle with that, they came from backgrounds where the parents were less empathic. There was not much of empathy, and they had to struggle for everything. It was conditional. I remember I was sharing with someone and telling them, I really love bright colors, you know. And I have this one of my little children, my daughter. She always says, "Mommy, you know, your colors are so bright, you know. The house is so bright. It looks fancy." And the girl likes dark colors. She prefers the cool tones of gray, charcoal gray, dark shades generally. And you see, as someone who has some understanding, I'm able to understand this child and to realize that we have a personality different. And that is not going to make me hate my child, you know. What I did is I tried to create a room for her that has those colors where she can fit in and feel comfortable, you know. So if you come from a family whereby the parents are not in touch or the caregivers are not in touch with your feelings, it begins to affect the way you do things in future. You will try to please people. You see, as opposed to me making and creating a room for her, a parent who is not sensitive to the feelings of this child, they may begin to judge the child. They may begin to speak harshly and tell them to align with what they like. They may tell the child to start loving their colors, and the child may even begin to try to love and feel guilty for expressing themselves because their taste and their preference is different from the caregiver. And that is what we call now conditional positive regard, which is not good. When you see adults struggling to accept themselves, it shows that as they grew up, they did not have unconditional positive regard. Okay? So, adults who struggle, sometimes those who want to compensate for a lack of self-acceptance, try to overwork. Have you ever seen people who just work and work to please the employer? They don't even have time for themselves. They don't have time for their families. It's because in their childhood, there was no empathy. They had to earn. They had to earn for their parents to accept them, everything. They had to do something so that they can earn acceptance from their parents. So they grow up in that way. And a good example is we internalize negative feelings, e.g., feelings of rejection from overly critical parents. You see, when you grow up in a family where they are ever criticizing you, you end up even not having an identity. Have you ever seen those people who are married, their husbands, but they have to keep on calling their father to tell them? They have to get instructions from their father. They cannot make decisions. Some have to call their mother, even wives similarly. There are people who cannot do anything. They have to go back and call their mother. I remember there's a young girl who got married somewhere, and I was so concerned because even everything, the marriage, it was the mother organizing, the setup, everything. And even when I tried to talk to this mother, she told me that the mother to the boy to the man did not have an issue. But deep within my heart, I knew that there must be some issues, because you cannot want to run your children's family. You want your daughter to do things exactly the way you did. You even interfere with their marriage and everything. That is what we call controlling. Those are people who are controllers. So such a child will never have an identity. They will still be fixated. They are still stuck at when they were 8 years, because they are now 30. They are getting married, but they cannot stand for what they want. They have no clear-cut identity. If you ask them anything, whether it is a spouse asking them, they must get back to the mother or the father. That clearly in itself will bring up issues in the future. Negative cycles and patterns develop as a result of this, from the example that I've just given you, because we parent in the same way and manner we were parented. Look at the example that I've given you. If this girl is following the parenting style of the mother, that is the same way and manner that she's going to parent her children, you see, and the cycle will continue and continue. Sometimes in religious cycles, people will talk about curses, people will talk about negative bloodlines, but you see, when you look at it, we imitate and we copy. The way we were parented is the way we tend to parent our children. And unless we become self-aware and come to the place of self-acceptance, then it becomes very difficult to tackle these issues and to bring a change. The cycles keep on repeating. Another thing that affects our self-acceptance is environmental factors, factors such as where you went to school, okay? And the neighborhood that you grew in, the kind of teachers that you have. People really underestimate that, but teachers can affect the way you see yourself. Picture this. You are a child who was struggling. Maybe you are a late bloomer. It was difficult for you to understand things when you are in year 1 or standard 2, and you had this teacher who could not understand you. They kept hammering negative words into you, telling you how you are a sham or a scam, telling you how you are a failure, making you to repeat classes, because long time it used to happen that way. And that can really be, it can really affect somebody and the way they see themselves. The kind of friends that we keep, there are children who grow up in estates or areas where people look at them. Sometimes they are tribal or they are racist. It begins to affect. You begin to struggle with accepting yourself. People can look at you and ask you questions. You can come from an environment, growing up, and maybe you are from a single family, a single parent family. When others are talking about their dad and mom, you don't know how to talk as a child. It affects. You can grow up with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. All those are factors that affect the way we view life. We end up shaming ourselves, feeling so guilty, internalizing so many things that end up coming up or manifesting in our relationships in the future. So, how do we develop self-acceptance? Because it is a journey. It is not a one-day process. We can do this, as I talk to you, just in the same way that you do journaling. You can decide to journal your feelings, As you journal your thoughts, you are able to identify, identify toxic thought patterns and any judgmental thoughts, because when you self-accept, you are not supposed to judge yourself. Viewers, thank you. On that note, I hope that you've been able to pick a few things and observations about self-acceptance. You can look back into your childhood, how you grew up, the environment, and be able to assess what could have affected you in the manner in which you handle yourself. Are you too harsh on yourself? Do you judge yourself? As you reflect on those things, next week, join me on this journey as we discuss how to develop self-acceptance. Thank you. Till then, goodbye.